Now the moment you've all been waiting for.
I am Nate Riggle, and you are listening to The Way of the Bonfire. All right, my friends, welcome to the podcast where we focus on bringing the world together in the most meaningful ways possible so that more people can stop waiting or thinking that they have to wait to make the most of their lives. I want you to think about this for a second. Almost every movie, worth watching anyway, has a carefully selected soundtrack. We go to movies and we watch them to be entertained, yes, but it's deeper than that. Whether we realize it or are willing to admit it or not, is deeper than that. We watch them to feel a certain way. And that might be excited, that might be inspired, that might be like we like the emotions that they feel and the way they make us feel engaged. And we like to experience a story at another level that visuals alone, they can't quite reach. We take the soundtrack in the movies for granted on it being maybe the biggest reason it was such a great movie. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, I'll give you an example. What if I took the soundtrack out of freaking Star Wars? It might not even be worth watching. I mean, it'd still be cool to see the lightsabers and everything, but I mean, I don't know if it'd be as popular as it is today. I don't know if it ever would have made it like it has. Let's say, what if we just let anyone, like in the movie theater, you're watching the movie Gladiator, and we just said, you know what? We're going to do this differently this time. We're just going to let anyone change the soundtrack to anything during this movie at any point. So they start playing I'm a Barbie Girl or something in the main battle scene. Like, it would ruin the experience 100% of the time if the soundtrack wasn't controlled. It wouldn't even feel like a good story. We would disengage and stop trying to follow anything in the plot. It would just be like, well, what is the point if anybody can just change the music in the background? Like, or maybe they changed it to something depressing and melancholy, and we're like, this movie is a real bummer. In fact, there's a lot of creators on YouTube that are out there who do this, and it's actually kind of entertaining to see and eye-opening to see how much things can change when just the music is different, just the soundtrack. Like the dialogue could even be the same, and they make it look like some upbeat comedy is now like this depressing noir film. You know what I'm talking about, like The Crow or something. Like they could turn stylistically totally different movie into a sad movie or a happy movie or whatever it is, just by changing that soundtrack at certain moments. So now think about this for a second. We always have a soundtrack playing in our mind. The way they say it is we're always secreting thoughts. Like we can't not do that. Now, the reason that meditation is so powerful is because it's a way of not shutting off thought and not shutting off our minds. But most forms of meditation are there to help you have a better relationship and control of what's happening in there and allowing it to come in and dismissing it as you please, right? Whatever those thoughts are and kind of you're more in tune with what's happening. And I think it's with the internal soundtrack. So right now, if you're listening intently, this podcast episode is at least part of that soundtrack. And when it's over, maybe you'll dwell on the idea I'm sharing here and do some introspection. And even better, maybe you'll decide to do something with it and commit to be more mindful of the soundtrack concept in your day to day. Or maybe you think this is just nice background noise and kind of sets you on a better trajectory in that way. Either way, or maybe you don't like it. Doesn't matter. It's part of the soundtrack because you've allowed it to come into your life, and you've actually had to choose it in some way at some point, even if you got this on autoplay in your playlist for any new episode. Either way, you had to make a choice at some point. And I realized that what we don't really have is a natural tendency to pay attention to the soundtrack that is playing in our mind most of the time. Like if I'm driving down my car listening to my playlist and it stops, or someone reaches up, or an ad comes on and changes it suddenly, like in the middle of a song, I'd be like, you know, I'm going to have a reaction, and I might not like it. And I might say nothing if it's some person that did it, but I'm probably going to be like, what on earth happened to my Bob Marley? you know, or I was just about to go into the riff on that track. How dare they? or, and I might just look at the person, whoever changed it, and say, I don't think so, like, but do we do this in our own minds? We have the same level of control to change the soundtrack. We may not be able to control or switch emotions at will, or like, because emotions are something that comes as a result of the soundtrack and as a result of the stuff outside of us. But we have the control of what plays on our soundtrack. And if we let anyone, including ourselves, sometimes we're the worst ones, just play whatever in there, then no wonder we get surprised and depressed and suddenly feel off and out of sync or out of control of our own lives and our dreams and future. And we struggle to find meaning, or we assign the wrong means terrible things, right? This is not good. And I mean this literally and figuratively. Like, number one, it's the foundation of our freedom and autonomy to choose what we let into our minds, and what we do with what we let into our minds, how we think about that and how we respond to it. This is called out over and over in almost every single discipline having to do with the mind, with neuroscience, with religion, with anything. It comes back to like, this is the foundation of our freedom, is that we get to choose what happens in our minds. And there's might be caveats to that, and I can cover those in a minute. But so if we're not making that choice of what soundtrack or what we're allowing to come into our mind and our thoughts and what the meaning that we assign to those things, so if we're not doing that, we're just letting life happen to us. We're not even on autopilot. That would be better. We're just letting the boat float backwards and sideways in any which direction down the rocky river. And is it potentially still a comfortable and enjoyable and an easy life, even if we're not actively monitoring and in control of the soundtrack? Yes, potentially. Maybe we like the music that's playing. Maybe we got lucky and the people around us are supportive and kind and they're respectful of us, and we're not getting picked on and bullied and told certain things that we shouldn't, that aren't good for us, and expected to believe those things. So if that's our situation, why do we need to change anything? And I've had that question. It's like, I don't understand what the need for change is. And the reason is because we're not living consciously. And the only thing that is constant and guaranteed is change. So if you change nothing, even if it's great, and don't learn to manage the soundtrack, then you're just waiting for things to happen. And that's not only incredibly dangerous and naive, but it's not what humans were made for. So I'm not just worried about myself potentially, like if I'm being ignorant like that and I don't care just kind of let whatever happens, and I'm not guiding my curiosity, I'm not guiding what I allow to come my way, what I allow to stay, then I'm not just worried about what danger that'll bring. I'm also worried about missing out and not making the most of what's possible. Like it feels kind of like you're just a rock in the stream, right? Or you're just a piece of wood floating down the stream. Like, what is your purpose? What humans are made for is to actively seek to find what lights us up, makes us feel alive, and helps us grow. And to consciously, this is important, choose that and not have it chosen for us, and share and enjoy. Like once we know what that is, like the next level is to just be able to share and enjoy it with others as immediately as possible, not some future day when all the conditions are right, and not to have it rationalized and chosen for us because it suits someone else's passing whim or agenda, or, the rigidity of whatever they're dealing with. We can allow people to influence us and do that. That's part of it. But your soundtrack is kind of what sits above all that. It's not to be left to hope and blind trust. Like I wouldn't let some stranger walk into my house and say, "Hey, just watch." I wouldn't just look at them and say, "Hey, just watch whatever you want." I have kids, but they're all under 12 and under, but nothing's off limits. Go ahead and watch that graphic horror movie. They might be a little scared, but only until the movie's over. And that sounds like a ridiculous example, but I believe most of us have this policy of honoring whatever soundtrack wants to play for us at any given moment. It's behind what causes us to be like, I don't know, I'm just really not feeling like doing much, and I haven't for a while. I just don't have the fire that I used to. And people around you might be like, what? Why not? What's wrong? And you're like, I don't know, I just had a rough day. Right? We have all these phrases that we say, or maybe we open up a little bit. It just feels like nothing's fair. And then we vent and we say, like, this person, if so-and-so would just stop doing this thing, then I'd be happy. I'd be able to do what I want. And then I would be happier. But the question to ask there is it what they're doing, or are you letting them change the channel on your soundtrack? If it feels like nothing's fair, is the point that it's not fair, or is the point that your soundtrack is off and you allowed the thing that wasn't fair to let a different soundtrack play? And maybe you're saying, well, these people have a position, like I don't have a choice, that I have to let them change the channel because of my place in the pecking order, or my place in the company, or the way the relationship dynamic is, or I have to let them change the channel on my soundtrack. And you say, I don't have a choice. And there's the problem. We confuse others' actions and behaviors and our own current circumstances, whether those be awesome or whether those be terrible in our perception, and even our feelings, which are real valid things. We confuse that with someone also controlling our soundtrack. Like someone can make a request, but we can't let anyone touch that track without permission. Or if they do somehow get access to it, we don't let it stay and convince us that, well, they're better suited to the job. I'm not good enough, because that's a new soundtrack. Now we have a belief that isn't helpful, and that's the soundtrack that we've switched it to without knowing it. Like if the music in my house is playing screamo because I let the wrong thoughts and beliefs set up shop in there, and I hate screamo. I like metal and a lot of different other stuff, but screamo sucks because it's just got no rhyme or reason, and I can't get that soundtrack to leave. Then yeah, I'll call someone over, and like I still have a choice to get somebody to come help me kick that out. So there's 3 questions to become the DJ or the composer of your own life soundtrack that I'm pondering this week, and that I'm constantly being more vigilant on. Number 1, what are you listening to? And I mean, like I said before, I mean this literally and figuratively. Like, what, if you're listening to music, what music are you listening to? Like, how did that get on your playlist? And how often are you listening to that music? Especially if it's uplifting and it's doing good for you. Like, it has a big effect on you. Like, why aren't you listening to that more? Is it media of some other kind, like a show, a movie? Is it your own thoughts and feelings? And if it is a show or media, is it just because you want to finish binging that thing and like doing this collection thing where you're like, I'm going to get through all these shows and then I'll be able to talk about them. And I always have to have a show to watch, or I always have to have a movie to watch. Are your own thoughts and feelings and your ruminations and what you spend most of your time thinking about, how are those things? Are they good? Are they bad? Or like, what are they? Just to look at them and say, okay, am I listening to these things? Is this causing me to behave or not to act in some certain way? And why? Are others' opinions what I'm listening to the most? Why? Like, these could all be good things. Whatever you're listening to, it could, like, as a medium of, an influence, whether it's your thoughts or something outside of you, those could all be good things. Or they could be a soundtrack that's really not helping you, that's ruining the movie. So you have to ask yourself, why, number one, what are you listening to? Number 2, why? Why am I listening to this? And really think about that. Number 3 is, where is it coming from? Like, did I choose to have this in front of me, or is it just kind of been strategically and aggressively positioned in front of me in some way? If it is my own thoughts and feelings, like, where are those coming from? And why is it stuck on that soundtrack? If you're not willing to wonder where it's coming from, then you're just letting anybody go DJ your party. And they could be putting anything on there. So that's the question to ask next is number 4. Is it making the movie better or worse? And how and why? Again, like, is it bringing me into a place where I have true beliefs that I can count on that move me to action, to move me to want to do good things? Or is it causing me to throw my hands up in the air and be angry at the world, be angry at myself? What kind of state is it putting me into? Think about when you watch a movie. If the soundtrack's really good, you're up on the edge of your seat, you're laughing, you're talking about it for like years afterward. That's the state that movie puts you in because it had a great soundtrack and obviously, the plot and everything else. But usually the best movies that you talk about forever had that soundtrack. So what state is this putting me into? Do I like it? If you don't like it and you know it's not good for you, then we should go back to the soundtrack and say, maybe we cut that one out. Maybe we cut that piece out. Oh, maybe, but I'm so used to it. I love it. That's what your brain does. It wants you to keep the same. We got to get rid of that part of the soundtrack. If it's making the movie worse, what that looks like is you're assigning meaning to things. Everything going backwards is that was a bad thing. And so that means I'm a bad person or I'm destined to have bad things. It's never going to work out for me. I've tried this many times. I'm just an insane person because I'm doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Like going right to that negative bent of things. And no, it isn't just about being positive because sometimes it's making the soundtrack you're giving yourself as a denial soundtrack. Like everything's fine. I don't need to change anything. My life's good. And you're heading off a cliff. So your soundtrack still sucks, right? It's telling you the wrong thing. So it's actually going to make it's about to make your movie worse if you don't face it and you don't get it right. Like, are you just using your thoughts to numb and escape? And are you using the soundtrack to avoid and not feel something? Or, is the soundtrack causing you to fear, like what you're telling yourself, what you're believing, what you're hearing? Like, is this bringing something into your life? Even if it is just, it feels good or it feels like an escape. Is that the best soundtrack that you could be playing? Is it causing you to feel more overwhelmed by listening to tons of news? And is even just listening to this podcast making you feel guilty? Well, then turn it off. That's not the intent of it. Number 5, that's the whole point of this is, what are you going to do about it? So what are you listening to? Why? Where's it coming from? Is it making the movie better or worse? And most importantly, what are you going to do about the answers to those questions? Are you going to overreact if somebody's opinion is bringing you down? Are you going to blame other people for their negative attitude and say, well, I couldn't keep my soundtrack good because of them? Are you going to feel self-pity because of what somebody said to you and you believed it? Like, you should be doing this instead of this. Are you going to make these very reasonable excuses and explanations on why you can't do this thing that you really know you want to do right now? It's like in your bones and it's what will bring you happiness, but you have all these reasonable excuses. That's not a good soundtrack. Are you going to change the track? Are you going to refresh and update your playlist? Like, don't let your soundtrack get tired either. Right? You can keep the songs that you never want to get out of there in your playlist, but take out the ones that the stuff in your soundtrack that hasn't been helping you, or that isn't helping you anymore, or isn't relevant anymore, or it's just not, like, you've changed and it didn't change with you. So find something else to bring along that's better. And I know you're thinking, easier said than done, Nate. I know. Oh, I know. My soundtrack still gets totally out of whack more often than I would like it to. In fact, sometimes when I think I have it perfectly dialed in, and I'm like, oh, I got everything just how it needs to be. This is the best. I'm the man. That's when I fall into the biggest slump and the thing turns on me because I don't keep an eye on it. if I'm being too arrogant about, oh, I'm the one that I'm the composer, I'm the DJ, nobody else can have any input on it. And then because I'm not paying attention to it and I think I have it all figured out, I let some seemingly innocent tracks sneak in and take over. And that's why while it is our choice and ultimately our power to decide what we let play in our minds, we have to recognize that or we won't do anything about it. That's number one. Number two, we can't create the playlist on our own. We need God. We need each other. We need people we trust to help us find the best tracks and help us paint our masterpiece. So don't write people off and see them as a threat. Every single request or idea as a threat to your soundtrack. It might make your soundtrack so much better if it's the right source. So pay attention to that, and let's keep a close eye on our soundtrack this week. Go get 'em.